"She can't even sit properly," the headmistress scoffed. "Stop wasting our time." Those words humiliated her. But she didn't walk away. She walked to a forgotten piano in a dark hallway. And when the light in the grand auditorium, her music lit up the world. This is the breathtaking story of Eva Monroe, a quiet girl mocked for daring to dream, silenced by elitism, and nearly erased by pride. But when fate turned off the power, she let her soul speak through the keys, and left an entire academy stunned. From basement echoes to the New York stage, from forgotten child to unforgettable composer, this story will break your heart, then rebuild it, note by note. Now, before we dive deeper, please like and subscribe to our channel. We share powerful, meaningful stories like this every day. And drop a comment below to let us know what time and where you're watching from. Thank you so much, and now let's get back to the story. You don't belong here, dear. This school is for the gifted, not the lost. The words slipped off Headmistress Clara Hemsley's tongue like ice on marble, smooth and cold, with the kind of practiced cruelty that didn't need to be loud to cut deep. The hall was silent, ornate chandeliers glittering above the polished wooden stage where a young girl stood, shrinking under the scrutiny of old money and sharper eyes. Clara's thin smile barely moved as she flipped shut the folder bearing the girl's name. Eva Monroe stood frozen, clutching a stack of worn handwritten sheet music that trembled slightly in her hands. She wasn't dressed like the others. No pressed uniform or polished shoes, no proud parents waiting outside in the rain-soaked courtyard. Just a plain blue dress 2 sizes too big and an unbrushed ponytail that kept slipping over her cheek. Yet there was a quiet dignity in how she held herself, like a candle's flame that refuses to go out no matter how much the wind tries. She took one step forward. I've come to audition," she said, her voice soft but steady. Clara tilted her head as though trying to hear a distant echo. "And you've had formal training, have you?" Her voice was saccharine now, mocking. Eva swallowed. "No, ma'am." A ripple of stifled laughter came from the row of students seated at the edge of the stage, all of them dressed in elegant blacks and whites, their eyes gleaming with superiority. The pianist who had performed before her had received polite applause and a nod from the judges. Eva had only introduced herself, and already the room was turning on her. One of the judges, a balding man with gold-rimmed spectacles, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Shall we let her play?" he asked without enthusiasm. "Let her?" Clara laughed lightly, her voice echoing through the hall like wind chimes in a blizzard. "If she insists." Eva moved toward the piano, a glossy Steinway that gleamed like a mirror beneath the soft stage lights. Her fingers, small and scarred from cleaning jobs and weekend yard work, hovered above the ivory keys. She closed her eyes, the way her mother had taught her. "Breathe in. Remember the melody. Let it tell your story." But just as she pressed her first note, a sharp voice cracked through the silence. No, stop." Clara's chair screeched as she stood. "Your posture's all wrong. You're going to embarrass yourself. There's no need to continue." Eva looked up, her hand frozen mid-air. "Please. I came all this way. And now you can go." Clara crossed her arms. "There's dignity in knowing when something isn't meant for you." Another round of quiet snickering buzzed in the room like static. The judges remained still. No one stood up for her. The room grew colder, not because of the weather, but because of the absence of kindness. Eva's shoulders sagged. She gathered her music, holding it like armor to her chest. As she turned to leave, the light seemed to burn brighter, mocking her as she stepped off the stage. Backstage was darker, colder. It always was for those who weren't wanted in the spotlight. She moved through the narrow corridor, trying not to cry. Every step felt heavier than the last, every breath laced with the sour taste of shame. Her mother used to say that music was a bridge between sorrow and healing, between silence and soul. But Eva wondered now if maybe that bridge had been washed away by the storm brewing outside. "Eva," a voice whispered. She turned. It was Mr. Rowan, the janitor. He was nearly 60, with kind eyes and hands that smelled of old books and varnish. He had seen her earlier, sitting alone on the stone bench outside while others arrived in limousines and town cars. He had offered her a sandwich then and asked her what she'd come for. He stepped closer now, lowering his voice. "You came all this way. You don't stop now." Her eyes welled. "They laughed at me. They don't know you," he said simply, "but I've heard you hum while sweeping the courtyard. And I've heard ghosts quieter than your footsteps, louder than your song. Come." She followed him down a narrow hallway, past old rehearsal rooms and forgotten closets, until they reached a door she hadn't noticed before. Wooden, warped by time, with a brass handle worn smooth. He opened it, and inside was a room long out of use. The walls were lined with cracked mirrors and faded portraits of alumni no one remembered anymore. And in the center stood an old upright piano, its finish dulled by age, its keys mismatched in color, some chipped. Eva stepped inside, brushing dust from the bench. "It's not much," Rowan said, "but it plays, and sometimes that's all you need." He left quietly, letting the door fall shut behind him. She sat alone. Outside, the wind screamed through the stone corridors of the academy, rattling windows and threatening rain. Thunder rolled in the distance, like a warning, like a drumbeat for something unspoken. Eva placed her music down gently but didn't open it. She didn't need to. Instead, she closed her eyes. She remembered her mother, seated at a piano in a church basement, playing songs that made people cry without understanding why. She remembered falling asleep to lullabies made of shadows and light. She remembered laughter and warmth, and the night her mother's hands went still. And then she began to play. It wasn't a classical piece. It wasn't anything she'd memorized. It was a melody stitched from grief and memory, heartache and hope. Her fingers moved not with precision, but with purpose. Every note was a whisper, every chord a confession. The piano groaned beneath her touch, but gave in, reluctantly, tenderly, as though it too remembered something it had lost. She didn't hear the rain begin. She didn't hear the storm slam its fist against the academy's windows. She didn't even hear the sudden silence that fell over the main hall when the power flickered and died. Because all she heard was music. And all they heard, the judges, the students, even Clara Hemsley, was a ghost playing in the dark. It happened slowly at first, so slowly that no one noticed until the silence felt too heavy to ignore. A single flicker, then another. And then, like a breath held too long finally released, the entire hall was swallowed in darkness. Gasps filled the auditorium. Students sat frozen mid-laugh. Judges paused mid-scribble. Even Clara Hemsley looked up from her notes, her face briefly illuminated by the dying glow of the emergency exit signs. The chandeliers above gave one final spark, then surrendered to the storm outside. "What's going on?" one of the students whispered, clutching her tablet. "It's the grid," muttered a technician near the sound booth. "That storm's worse than we thought." Clara pushed up from her velvet chair, heels clicking sharply across the marble floor. "We have protocols for this," she snapped to no one in particular. "Get the backup generators. I don't care if lightning hit the chapel's steeple. We will not descend into chaos." But even she couldn't speak over what came next. From somewhere beyond the stage, not inside the hall but close, just behind its walls, came music. Not loud, not intrusive, but there, a piano. It started with a single note that lingered like perfume in a closed room, and then another, carefully chosen, gently placed. The melody trickled in like water through cracks in stone, moving with cautious grace, almost afraid to be heard, and then it grew. No one spoke, no one moved. It was as though time itself had stepped aside, giving way to the notes that now unfolded like petals in a storm. The judges, disoriented and disarmed, leaned forward. One of them whispered, "Is someone still auditioning?" But no reply came. Clara's mouth opened, but the words never arrived. Her eyes, that had moments ago been filled with arrogant composure, darted toward the wings of the stage. She tried to dismiss it, a student messing about in the dark, but something in her bones shifted. This wasn't rehearsal noise. This wasn't a child pounding keys in protest. This was music, real music. It was flawed, yes, raw and unpolished, but breathtaking in its honesty. It climbed unevenly at times, like someone finding their balance on trembling legs, then soared suddenly, carried by an emotion too powerful to restrain. The melody told a story without words, a girl's story, and everyone knew it, even if they didn't know her name. It was Eva. Backstage, she played with eyes closed and breath held tight, her whole body trembling, not with fear, but with something deeper, release. This was the song she'd kept inside for years, tucked away while scrubbing stairs or washing dishes in homes she'd never belonged to. This was the melody her mother had once played, transformed now by years of silence, by longing, by love remembered and love lost. She didn't know the power had gone out. She didn't know the audience was listening. She only knew the notes and how to set them free. Across the hallway, the music seeped through vents and cracks, echoing in marble corridors and drifting beneath heavy auditorium doors. For a moment, the building itself seemed to pause, breathing in what had been hidden too long. And then the lights returned. First the exit signs brightened. Then the soft gold of chandelier bulbs flickered back to life. Slowly, the room became whole again. But not as it was before. Something had shifted in the dark. The air felt different. Eyes were wide not from fear now, but awe. One of the judges rose. "I know that piece," he murmured. But he was wrong. No one knew it, because no one had ever played it, because it had never been written, only lived. Clara stepped toward the side of the stage, her breath shallow, her posture faltering for the first time in years. Her gaze was drawn beyond the thick curtains, down the hallway where the sound still lingered. And there she saw her, Eva, a girl in a blue dress, seated at an old upright piano in a forgotten room, her fingers moving like they were painting with light. Her eyes were closed, her face turned upward, as though listening to something no one else could hear. And around her, the dust danced. The door creaked open wider. The audience in the hall stirred as someone projected the security feed onto the back wall, grainy footage from an old backstage camera. Everyone could see her now. Everyone could hear her. And Clara Hemsley couldn't speak. She had mocked this girl. She had sent her away. But now, watching her, radiant in the glow of her own truth, Clara could only stand and listen, powerless against the beauty she had tried to bury. The melody rose again, this time with urgency, like the last breath of someone finally allowed to dream. It told of pain, yes, but also resilience. It told of cold winters, forgotten birthdays, quiet walks past music stores where pianos waited behind glass like promises that would never come. It told of a girl who taught herself to play on tabletops, on her knees, on silence. And still, she played. Tears welled in the eyes of the judge from Juilliard. He leaned over to his colleague and whispered, "I've never heard anything so honest." The colleague nodded, speechless. The final notes came not as a crescendo, but as a prayer. Soft, barely audible, like the hush before sleep. Eva's hands hovered in the air after she finished, unwilling to break the silence her music had created. Then slowly she lowered them into her lap. She turned her head and saw them. In the doorway, lit now by the full return of power, stood the headmistress. Behind her, a line of judges and students. Eyes wide, faces changed. Eva stood, startled. She reached quickly for her sheet music, ashamed she'd been caught trespassing in a room she didn't belong in. But Clara didn't move. Neither did the others. It was the Juilliard judge who stepped forward first. "What's your name?" he asked, voice almost reverent. Eva blinked. "Eva Monroe." He nodded once. "You just played your way in." Silence again. Then applause. Not polite, not rehearsed, but real. A slow, swelling sound that moved like waves in the auditorium. First the judges, then the students, even the technician in the back. Clara stood frozen, her hands limp by her side, her eyes unreadable. Something inside her had cracked, perhaps not broken, not yet, but cracked in a way that would never quite heal. Eva looked down at the old piano, the one she'd breathed life into again. And for the first time since her mother passed, she smiled. The applause faded slowly, like rain easing from a storm. It didn't end abruptly. It unraveled gently, as if everyone in that hallway and auditorium was afraid of letting the silence swallow what had just happened. Something sacred had passed through the walls of the academy, and no one quite knew what to do with it. Eva stood there, her back against the upright piano, eyes wide and chest rising and falling with uneven breath. She clutched the frayed edge of her music sheet like it might float away if she let go. The Juilliard judge took one more step closer, hand extended, voice softened by awe. "Eva, would you join us on stage? We'd like to speak with you properly." She blinked, unsure if she'd heard him correctly. Her throat tightened. The same stage she'd been dismissed from? The same platform Clara had stripped her dignity on? I wasn't supposed to play," Eva stammered. "I didn't even mean for anyone to." "You meant it," he interrupted gently, "and that's why it mattered." She hesitated. For so long, her instinct had been to shrink, to withdraw before she could be pushed. But something about the way that man looked at her, not with pity, not with doubt, but with something close to reverence, made her legs move forward. She stepped past the old piano, past the portraits whose eyes had seen better musicians and worse hearts, past the cracked mirror that hadn't reflected hope in decades. When she emerged from backstage, the hall was lit again, gold chandeliers steady and bright. But somehow, the light felt different, softer, kinder. Clara Hemsley stood stiffly to the side of the judge's table. Her arms were crossed now, not in authority but in defense, like someone trying to keep the wind from stealing what warmth they had left. Her eyes followed Eva, but they held no command, just confusion, and something buried underneath: fear. The other students sat still, unsure whether to treat Eva like a peer, a rival, or a miracle. Eva stopped at center stage. Her palms were damp, her knees uncertain, but her voice, when it came, was clearer than she expected. "I'm sorry for playing without permission." The Juilliard judge shook his head. "No, Eva, you gave us the most truthful performance we've had all day." Another judge nodded beside him, the older woman with silver braids and a notebook full of musical shorthand. "You don't come from money, do you?" Eva hesitated, then shook her head. "No, ma'am." The woman smiled. "Good. Neither did I." The man with the gold spectacles leaned in now, folding his hands. "Did you write that piece yourself?" Eva hesitated. "No, not on paper, but it's from my mother, sort of. She used to play something like it. I changed it over time." "That's called composition, my dear," he said. "And it's a gift, one very few people can learn, and even fewer can feel." A strange hush fell again, like the walls themselves were leaning closer. Clara finally stepped forward. She tried to smile, something stiff and strange, but her voice came sharp again, brittle with the need to reassert control. "Let's not get too carried away," she said. She broke protocol, walked off stage, played an unsanctioned piece on a forgotten instrument. "There are rules for a reason." Her words dropped like stones into the silence. The silver-braided judge stood up, and sometimes, she said, there are reasons to break them. Clara's eyes flickered. "This school doesn't hand out charity spots." "No one's asking you to," the Juilliard man said coolly. "But if your institution doesn't recognize brilliance when it hears it, then perhaps we've misunderstood what it means to be here." Clara's lips parted, but nothing came out. And that's when Mr. Rowan, the janitor, stepped into view from the side door. He wasn't meant to be part of the moment, wasn't dressed in any uniform of prestige, but in that second he looked every bit a guardian of something sacred. He nodded once at Eva, then turned his gaze to the judges. "I've worked here 22 years, cleaned more practice rooms than you've ever seen. I've heard every sonata and etude echo through these walls. What she played tonight wasn't perfect, but it was real. And I don't know what this school wants, but the world outside, it's starving for that kind of truth." Silence. Then applause again, this time louder, braver. Not everyone clapped, but enough did to make Clara look as though the floor beneath her had just cracked. Eva didn't know what to say, so she didn't say anything. She turned, walked calmly to the Steinway at center stage, and sat down. No one told her to. No one dared stop her. She placed her hands on the keys and began to play. Not the piece from earlier, but something new. Something soft, a thank you, a goodbye, a beginning. She wasn't even sure what it was, only that it had been waiting for this moment. She played for the mothers who never saw their children shine. She played for the girls who were told they didn't belong, who were laughed at and turned away and silenced before they ever had a chance to be heard. She played because this time, the lights were on, and she was no longer in the shadows. When she finished, there was a pause before the applause came. But it did come, and it swept through the room like spring wind. Clara Hemsley didn't clap. She stood very still, and then, without a word, she turned and walked quietly out of the hall. Eva watched her go, not with hate, not even with triumph, but with a calm, aching kind of peace. Because sometimes the most powerful victories are not loud, they are quiet, they are earned, and they are played in the light. The storm had passed by morning, but its scent lingered in the air, wet stone, crushed blossoms, and a whisper of something unsettled. The academy's ancient corridors were strangely quiet, the footsteps of staff and students hushed beneath a fragile reverence. Something had changed the night before. Something none of them had a name for. Eva stood at the foot of the grand staircase, staring up at the gilded portraits that lined the walls. Men in tuxedos and women in silk gowns, all with eyes that looked down as if guarding a legacy she was never meant to enter. She felt like an echo that had somehow wandered into a cathedral not meant for her voice. She adjusted the strap of her thrifted satchel. It was fraying again. Behind her, a soft creak echoed, the sound of a door opening slowly, cautiously. "Eva," came the voice, low and careful. She turned. It was Mrs. Langford, the silver-braided judge from the night before. She wasn't dressed in courtroom blacks now, but in a soft gray shawl, her face framed by morning light. "I wanted to catch you before orientation," she said, descending the stairs slowly. "You received your offer?" Eva nodded. She held out the crumpled letter. The edges were still damp from where she had clutched it all night, rereading it beneath the blankets of the small room Mr. Rowan had arranged for her near the janitor's wing. "Full scholarship," Eva whispered. "Is it real?" Langford smiled, eyes softening. "Oh, it's real. And overdue." Eva's throat tightened. She had no words, just the warmth of disbelief blooming quietly beneath her ribs. Langford leaned closer. "There are people who won't like it, who'll feel you've bypassed tradition, who'll question your right to be here. Don't let that shape your playing. Promise me?" "I promise," Eva said, though her voice cracked. Langford gave her shoulder a gentle squeeze, then moved past, her shawl fluttering like fog as she disappeared into the main hall. Eva turned again toward the portraits. The people in them still looked down, unchanged. But this time, she didn't lower her eyes. She stared right back. That morning, orientation unfolded with polished precision. Introductions from staff, performance videos, lists of expectations, and elite alumni stories. Eva sat quietly in the back row, unnoticed at first, until Clara entered the room. The headmistress moved like wind through glass, quiet but impossible to ignore. Her shoes clicked across the marble floor as she passed by the rows of students. Her smile polite, her eyes as unreadable as closed books. When she saw Eva, the smile didn't falter, but something flickered beneath it, a ripple, a splinter. "Miss Monroe," Clara said sweetly before the crowd, "congratulations on your unorthodox entrance." Eva offered a soft nod, unsure if she should smile. Clara's gaze lingered a moment longer than it needed to. Then she turned to address the room. "Talent is only the beginning," she said, her voice drifting through the space like smoke. "Discipline, tradition, and respect are what build greatness. Without them, brilliance becomes chaos." A few students looked at Eva from the corners of their eyes. The message had been delivered. After orientation, while others chatted and explored the campus, Eva wandered alone toward the practice wing. Her fingers itched to touch keys again, to play, to breathe, to find the melody that had not left her since last night. But when she reached room B12, the space listed under her new schedule, she paused. The door was slightly open. Inside stood a girl about her age, tall and confident, with crimson lipstick and manicured fingers. She hovered near the room's pristine grand piano like a hawk guarding its nest. "You must be the new girl," the girl said without turning. "Ah, yeah. This is my assigned." "Not anymore," the girl cut in, finally facing her. Her name badge read Madeline Carrington. "Headmistress Hemsley said there was a mistake. This one's reserved for upper-tier players. You've been moved." Eva's stomach dropped. "Moved?" Madeline handed her a slip of paper. "Sub-basement, room E7. The storage wing. No one really uses it. Enjoy the ambiance." Eva took the paper slowly, her fingers brushing the ink like it might vanish. She didn't ask questions. Not yet. Instead, she simply nodded and turned away. The walk to the sub-basement felt longer than it was. The air grew colder, the light dimmer, paint peeled from the walls here. The piano in E7 sat beneath a flickering bulb, its bench missing a leg, its cover scratched and dusty. But Eva sat anyway. She didn't cry, she didn't rage, she just placed her fingers on the keys and let the truth rise again. Because music, she was beginning to realize, didn't require permission. That night, she found Mr. Rowan sweeping leaves near the courtyard fountain. "They moved me," she said. "I figured they would," he replied, not surprised. "Old power doesn't like being rattled. What should I do?" He leaned on his broom. "Play louder." The next morning, Eva arrived at room E7 early. She cleaned the bench, polished the keys with her scarf, and tuned what she could by ear. When she began to play, her sound drifted up the stairwells, curling through vents, rushing past the ears of students rehearsing above. They didn't know where it came from at first, but they heard it. By the third day, 2 girls had followed the sound and sat outside her room during lunch, pretending not to listen. By the end of the week, a violinist from the chamber ensemble asked if he could accompany her. Quietly. No one needed to know. And on the 7th day, a note appeared on her door. No name, no threats, just 4 words. Stay in your place. Eva stared at the words for a long time. Then slowly she tore the paper in half. She walked into the room, closed the door behind her, and began to play. Because even in the dark, even buried beneath layers of silence and sabotage, her song would rise. Rain whispered against the arched windows of the academy as the midterm showcase loomed. It was the event every student lived for. The one chance each term to play before donors, alumni, and scouts from conservatories across the country. Scholarships were won there. Futures were born there. And Eva had been given a solo. Not officially, not through Clara Hemsley, but from the judges themselves. Mrs. Langford had insisted after hearing her piece echo again through the sub-basement halls. She plays with something the others don't even know they're missing, she'd said. Put her in the second act. Let them hear what can't be taught. Clara had smiled when the decision was announced. A smile that didn't reach her eyes. Eva had seen it, even as her heart beat wildly at the news. There was a pause in that smile, a calculation. And that's when she knew. The headmistress would not sit quietly. The days leading to the showcase were long and tight with tension. Students practiced like lives depended on it, and in a way, they did. Eva rehearsed every night in room E7, fingers stiff from long hours but spirit sharp. Sometimes Rowan listened from the door, sometimes no one came. But always, the melody lived. The morning before the showcase, a note arrived in her locker. Practice moved to room A1 for final piano prep, 2 p.m. sharp. Admin. She stared at it. A1 was the performance hall's side room, reserved for Steinway warm-ups and final tunings. She didn't question it, not openly, but as she walked there that afternoon the air felt wrong, like the moment before a string breaks mid-note. She opened the door. Darkness. Then motion. Someone brushed past her. Lights flicked on. The Steinway was open, its inside gutted. Strings snapped, hammers misaligned. Eva froze. A slow, deliberate voice came from behind. Oh no, looks like someone's out of luck. She turned. Madeline Carrington leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, lips painted in the same smug crimson. You really should be more careful where you leave your assignments. Some people don't appreciate shortcuts to the spotlight. Eva stared at the ruined piano. It looked like a wounded animal. This isn't just cruel, she said, voice shaking. It's vandalism. Madeline shrugged. Call it balance. Clara says the stage is a privilege, not a charity case. Eva stepped back, stunned. Clara told you to do this? Madeline didn't answer. She simply smiled and walked away. Eva remained still. The wreckage in front of her, a monument to everything she had fought through. And for the first time in weeks, the fear crept in. Maybe this really was all a mistake. Maybe she didn't belong here. Not among people who didn't just dislike her, but feared her enough to destroy beauty, to keep her quiet. She backed away, out of the room, down the corridor, and into the rain. It poured now, sharp and fast and cold, the kind of rain that doesn't ask permission. She sat beneath the stone archway by the courtyard, hair soaked, hands trembling, trying to piece together a backup plan. But the damage wasn't just to the piano, it was to her. That's when Rowan found her. You're drenched, he said, holding out an old academy sweatshirt. She didn't take it. They broke the keys, she whispered. They broke everything. Rowan didn't blink. Then play something else. I don't have another piano. You do, he said. Come with me. He led her through the west wing, closed off for renovations, students rarely allowed through. At the end of a long corridor stood a heavy door, chained shut. Rowan pulled a key from his belt and unlocked it. Inside was a room bathed in dust and shadows. But there, beneath a faded velvet tarp, sat a grand piano. It wasn't pristine. It wasn't new. But it was whole. This was hers, Rowan said softly. Langford's old practice room. She insisted it be preserved. It's yours now, just for tonight. Eva stepped forward, breath catching. She lifted the tarp. The piano's surface was scratched from decades of hands, but the keys gleamed faintly under the light filtering through stained glass. She sat, her fingers hovering above the ivory. I don't have sheet music, she murmured. Rowan smiled. You never needed it. So she played, all night, no sleep, no breaks. Just music, unwritten, unrehearsed, and completely her own. By morning, she was ready. The showcase evening arrived like a storm behind a curtain. Whispers in every hallway, pressed gowns, polished shoes, tension thick enough to taste. The grand auditorium filled with velvet and perfume, alumni shaking hands with donors, scouts clutching notebooks. Backstage, Eva stood in the shadows, listening as act after act unfolded. Flawless recitals, choreographed duets, orchestrated brilliance. Her name was called. The lights dimmed. She walked slowly onto the stage. There was a pause as the curtain rose. Clara Hemsley sat in the front row, hands folded, face smooth like untouched marble. The audience waited for Eva to sit at the Academy's stage Steinway. But she walked past it, and instead, another spotlight snapped on, stage left. There, wheeled in under cover just hours before, was the forgotten piano from the West Wing, polished and tuned by Rowan's aging hands. A gasp rose. Clara's face twitched, but Eva had already sat. She didn't bow, she didn't speak, she simply played. And what came forth was not a performance. It was a rebellion stitched into song. It was memory and loss, defiance and grace. It was every moment someone told her no turned into a living, aching yes. People stopped breathing. Clara's hand slowly gripped her seat, and in that suspended moment, Eva finished the final note, not with a flourish, but with a whisper. Silence. Then the room exploded. Standing ovation. Some wept, others shouted. The scouts scrambled to scribble her name. Clara did not stand, but she didn't speak either. Eva bowed, not to them, but to the piano that saved her. And as she stepped into the wings, Langford met her there. You didn't just play, she whispered. You claimed your place. Eva looked out over the applauding crowd, and for the first time, she believed it. The applause still echoed in Eva's ears as she stepped into the empty corridor behind the stage. Her hands, though trembling, held none of the fear they once had. Instead, her fingers felt charged, alive, like they had just held something greater than notes, something eternal. Langford walked beside her, composed as ever, but her eyes shimmered with something close to pride. The scouts will be calling, she said gently. You may want to keep your phone nearby tomorrow. Just a feeling. Eva smiled, but it was quiet. There was no gloating in her expression. Only the kind of joy that settles in the chest like a secret you don't need to prove anymore. She spent the rest of the evening tucked into a corner backstage, watching others receive their applause, their handshakes, their compliments. Some looked at her differently now. Not with disdain, but with hesitation, like she had grown too large to fit into the mold they tried to keep her in. Madeline passed her once without speaking. Her eyes held no victory anymore, only disbelief. And Clara never came backstage. She had vanished the moment the crowd rose for Eva, slipping away as if applause might burn her skin. The next morning, Eva woke to a knock. She opened the door of her modest dorm, still tucked away near the maintenance wing, and found a man in a navy blazer standing there with a letter in his hand. For you, he said, hand delivery. She took it with careful fingers. The envelope was cream-colored, the paper thick. Embossed on the seal was the emblem of the New York Conservatory of Fine Arts. Her heart stopped. She tore it open. The words were few, but they didn't need to be many. Eva Monroe, after witnessing your performance at last evening's showcase, we extend an invitation to perform at our Winter Honors Gala next month in Manhattan. You would be the youngest soloist in the program's history. Please reply within 72 hours. Travel and accommodations will be arranged in full. Respectfully, Dean Ashton Rivers. She stood there in the silence of her room, the letter trembling slightly in her grip. The New York Conservatory. The same one her mother used to whisper about when Eva was little. The place her mother never got to visit, only dream of as she played in dimly lit church halls. Now it was real, and they had seen her. But as she reached for her phone to call Rowan, a second letter slid under the door. No knock, just paper meeting linoleum with the smallest sigh. She bent down slowly. It was from Clara, typed, formal, unapologetic. Eva, given the unusual circumstances of your scholarship and the numerous disruptions tied to your admission, I regret to inform you that your solo opportunities within the school's future showcases are now suspended, pending a full review of protocol violations. Your behavior, while perhaps celebrated by some, undermine the order this institution depends upon. I trust you understand the importance of respecting the hierarchy of our academy. C. Hemsley. Eva read the letter twice. It felt like frost pressing against her chest. She folded it once, carefully, and set it beside the conservatory invitation. It was Clara's last move, an attempt to reassert power not with cruelty this time, but with structure, with bureaucracy, with the rules she wielded like a weapon wrapped in satin. Later that afternoon, Eva stood quietly outside Langford's office. The sun through the high windows splashed across the floor like honey. She knocked once. "Come in," Langford called. Eva stepped inside and handed her both letters. Langford read them slowly. When she finished, she didn't speak right away. She folded Clara's letter with sharp precision and dropped it into a drawer. Then she placed the conservatory letter on her desk, smoothing it with her palm like something sacred. "I wondered when this would come," she said. Eva blinked. "You knew?" Langford nodded. "That's why we invited the scouts. You weren't just a performer last night, Eva. You were the truth inside a room full of masks." "But Clara," Langford said, cutting her off gently, "is losing." She leaned forward. "Let me tell you something. Years ago, when I was a student here, Clara was already headmistress. She didn't like me either. I was too different, too unwilling to play polite. But I survived her, and so will you." Eva's voice was small. "She can still take things away." Langford smiled sadly. "Yes, she can. The little things, the stages, the solos, the polite nods. But not your music, not your name, and certainly not the stage that just opened in New York." There was a long pause. "Go," Langford said. "Play where the world can hear you." Eva nodded, emotion rising in her throat like a tide. "Thank you." As she stood to leave, Langford added softly, "And Eva," she turned, "let them know where you come from. Play like the lights might go out again." That night, Eva sat at the old West Wing piano one last time. She didn't bring sheet music. She didn't record it. She simply played for the memory of what this place had given her, and what it had tried to take. Outside, the first flakes of winter began to fall, and miles away, in a city of lights and marble halls, a seat was being saved for the girl no one expected. Snow blurred the edges of the world as Eva stepped off the train in New York City. The station was a cathedral of movement, rushing coats, wheeled suitcases, blinking departures. But she stood still for a moment, her breath blooming white as she took it in. This was her mother's city, not the one from brochures or postcards, but the one she used to speak of in hushed tones at night, of winter windows glowing from inside with music, of grand halls and narrow alleys, of the dream that had always been too far, too fragile. Eva stepped into it now, not as a child, but as the girl who had once been laughed off a stage and had played her way into history. A man in a dark coat and gold-rimmed glasses greeted her just beyond the gate. "Miss Monroe?" "Yes," she replied, unsure how her voice managed to carry. "I'm Dean Rivers," he said, offering a firm but warm handshake. "It's an honor. Come. You must be freezing." He led her to a sleek black car waiting just outside the station. The drive to the conservatory passed in a blur of lights and glass and snow swirling like ash in the street lamps. Eva sat silently, watching it all, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. When the car pulled up to the conservatory gates, her breath caught. It wasn't just a building, it was a monument to sound. Stone columns stretched toward the sky, and above them, intricate carvings of violins, harps, and keys seemed to sing without breath. Inside, everything smelled of wood polish and time. "You'll rehearse in the East Room tomorrow morning," Dean Rivers said as he escorted her to her room. "The gala is in 3 days, but tonight, rest. This place, it hums even in silence." Her room was small, but it overlooked the courtyard. She stood by the frosted window for a long time, tracing the outline of the stage dome with her eyes, wondering how she would feel when it was her sitting beneath its lights. The next morning, she found herself in a rehearsal room filled with dust motes and memory. A woman in her 60s sat beside the piano, reading sheet music with gentle reverence. Her silver hair was tied in a loose braid, and she didn't look up when Eva entered. "You're early," the woman said softly. "I didn't want to be late." The woman nodded, eyes still on the page. "Your hands, how do they feel today?" "Strong," Eva answered, though she wasn't sure it was true. "Good, because they have to carry more than notes." Only then did the woman look up, Her eyes were the color of warm bark, and they studied Eva not like a teacher studies a student, but like a reader studies a story that was once lost. "Sit," she said. Eva moved to the bench, running her fingers over the polished keys. These weren't chipped or sticky or faintly out of tune. These were perfect, and they terrified her. "Play something you know," the woman said, "but not what you performed at the showcase. Play what you remember when it's quiet." Eva didn't ask questions. She closed her eyes, and she played. It wasn't a sonata. It wasn't structured. It was the melody her mother used to hum while folding laundry. The one she whispered when Eva cried at night. The one that filled the silence after the machine stopped beeping in the hospital. It spilled out of her now, low and aching, the shape of grief softened by time. When she finished, she looked up and saw tears in the woman's eyes. "My name," the woman said quietly, "is Marianne Rowan. I was a friend of your mother's, years ago before she left the city." Eva's breath caught. "I taught her," Marianne said. "She was meant to be here. She would have been one of the best. She never told me," Eva whispered. "She couldn't. The scholarship was withdrawn when she became pregnant. Her family disowned her. She had to leave the city, but she never left the music. She used to send me tapes, recordings of lullabies she'd made up for you." Tears burned behind Eva's eyes. "Do you still have them?" she asked. Marianne nodded. "And now, I have you." The next few days moved like dreams. Eva practiced from dawn to dusk, sometimes alone, sometimes with Marianne watching quietly in the back. She chose a new piece for the gala, not the one she'd played at the academy, something gentler, more revealing, one of the lullabies her mother never got to perform. The night of the gala arrived with snow swirling around the grand entrance like a curtain waiting to rise. The hall was gilded and full. Senators, critics, artists, and ghosts of the past filled the velvet seats. Eva waited backstage, hands cold, heart steady. She looked down at her dress, a deep navy gown with stitched embroidery around the sleeves. Simple, elegant, and hers. Dean Rivers appeared beside her. "You ready?" he asked. She smiled. "Yes." He nodded once, then stepped aside. The announcer's voice echoed through the hall. "Tonight, we welcome a rising voice in American composition. Please give your attention to Miss Eva Monroe." She stepped out. The lights were warm, not blinding. The audience blurred into a wall of soft silhouettes. The grand piano gleamed like a polished truth waiting to be told. Eva sat. She placed her fingers on the keys, and then she played. It was not the flashiest piece of the night. It was not the loudest, but it was the one that made people forget where they were. It told the story of a woman who gave up everything to protect a song. A girl who played in secret so the memory wouldn't die. And a melody that, despite the silence, found its way home. When she finished, there was a moment of stillness so pure it felt like prayer. Then the audience rose, and the applause, this time, felt like something breaking open. Marianne wept in the front row. Eva stood. She bowed. And in her chest, where grief had once lived like a ghost, music bloomed. Snow fell like ash outside the academy windows, as Clara Hemsley sat alone in her office, fingers resting on her desk but not moving. A steaming cup of tea cooled untouched beside her, the rising vapor curling like smoke from a fire long extinguished. The wood-paneled room, once her fortress of control and ceremony, felt strangely cavernous now, like its walls no longer recognized her voice. She had seen the video, not on purpose. No, she had tried to avoid it. But it found her anyway, forwarded by a board member with a note that simply read, "Your former student?" And there she was, Eva Monroe, dressed in navy, seated before 1,000 shimmering lights. The music, a lullaby, unfamiliar and yet hauntingly unforgettable, had drifted through Clara's office computer like incense, curling around her ribcage and settling in the quiet place where her authority used to reside. Clara didn't move as the crowd in the video stood for Eva, didn't flinch when the camera panned across dignitaries on their feet, eyes shining. But something cracked anyway, silently and irrevocably. Eva had become what Clara feared most, undeniable. She reached slowly for the keyboard, typed New York Conservatory Honors Gala into the search bar, and found not one video, but dozens. Different angles, different headlines, all telling the same story. Street-born prodigy stuns elite gala with original piano composition. Eva Monroe, the sound of a generation, the melody that brought a room to tears. Clara closed the tab. She leaned back, letting her eyes drift upward toward the high, coffered ceiling. Once, her power had been unquestioned. Her school, her stage, her rules. She had carved success by selecting winners and trimming the rest away like unwanted branches. But Eva had bloomed beyond her scissors. A soft knock at the door. Clara straightened, regaining her poise in one swift motion. "Come in." It was Madeline. Her perfect posture had slipped a little over the past few weeks, but she still wore her uniform with sharp lines and a painted smile. "Headmistress," she said, stepping forward with a folded sheet of paper. "I thought you should see this." Clara took it, unfolding it slowly, her lips pressed into a thin line as she read. A petition, signed by nearly half the student body. Reinstate Eva Monroe's solo rights, honor her scholarship, acknowledge her legacy. No one dared call it rebellion, not out loud, but Clara could see it for what it was, the pulse of change in the walls she once ruled. She lowered the paper. "And whose idea was this?" Madeline hesitated, then admitted, "It started with the lower dorms. Someone printed it and left it in the dining hall. They say even some faculty signed." Clara's voice was quiet. "And you?" Madeline's silence was an answer. Clara dismissed her with a nod. Once alone again, she stood and walked slowly to the window. Outside, the courtyard looked the same as it had every winter, stone benches buried in snow, bare trees clawing at the gray sky. But something had shifted beneath the surface. The students no longer looked to her with awe. They were listening to someone else now, someone who had once been humiliated, banished to the basement, and had risen anyway. Eva had become more than a student. She had become a story, and stories were more dangerous than rules. Clara walked to the bookshelf and pulled out an old yearbook, her first as headmistress. The faces inside smiled back, frozen in time, none of them aware of who they would become, or who they wouldn't. At the back, in faded gold ink, was her own quote. "Order creates greatness. Emotion creates chaos." She stared at the words now and wondered if they had ever really been true. 2 days later, Eva returned to the academy. She didn't expect applause. She didn't want it. She arrived quietly, her suitcase in hand, her coat dusted with snow, and stepped back into the marble halls with the stillness of someone who had seen the world and returned not smaller, but clearer. Langford greeted her at the gates. "I told them you'd come back," she said, wrapping Eva in a hug. "I couldn't stay away," Eva whispered. "Not when there's still music in these walls." They walked the hallway together. Students peeked through cracked doors, whispered her name in tones once reserved for myths. Eva kept her eyes forward, but her hands curled around the handle of her suitcase like it was the anchor to her calm. When she reached the practice wing, she found a folded envelope taped to the door of room E7. No name, just handwriting she knew too well. Inside, a single line. "There's a performance next week. You won't be stopped this time." No signature. But it didn't need one. Clara Hemsley's script was unmistakable, and for the first time, Eva smiled at it. Because even the coldest walls could be warmed, if not by fire, then by music. The auditorium sat in silence, as though it had been waiting for this moment as long as she had. Eva stood center stage with her back to the audience, her eyes fixed on the polished keys before her. This time there were no flickering lights, no storm outside, no hidden corners. She was not in a basement. She was not a shadow behind a curtain. She was exactly where she belonged, in the light. The school's winter showcase had always been a prestigious event, but this year the seats filled faster than ever before. Alumni returned. Donors leaned forward. Even news outlets whispered about her. Eva Monroe, the girl who had once been dismissed mid-sentence, was now the headline act. The air inside the hall felt heavy with anticipation. Not the forced politeness of expectation, but the breathless stillness of reverence. Somewhere near the front sat Marianne Rowan, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Beside her, Langford, ever poised, her gaze steady and fierce. And just beyond them, slightly off-center and alone, sat Clara Hemsley. Clara hadn't announced she would attend. She had simply arrived. No fanfare, no speech, her expression unreadable, her hands folded tightly in her lap, as if holding something fragile together. The lights dimmed. Eva sat, her fingers hovered above the keys, and the room for a heartbeat was utterly still. She began with something simple, a gentle run of notes that moved like water over stone, a melody born from memory but refined in the fire of everything that had followed. It was soft but not uncertain. This wasn't a girl begging to be heard. This was a woman remembering how to speak in a language only her soul knew. Each note unfolded like breath, like the story of a winter long ago when a girl sat at her mother's feet and listened to lullabies whispered through trembling fingers. She played for that girl. She played for the mother she lost. She played for the night the lights went out and the room lit up in a way no chandelier could match. She played for the janitor who heard music in silence. She played for the woman who taught her without touch, and for the teacher who tried to silence her with rules. And with every note she rose. Clara watched from her seat, hands clenched so tightly her knuckles ached. But she didn't look away. She couldn't. There was something unbearable in watching a student you tried to diminish become something vast and bright, and yet there was something deeply humbling too. This was not rebellion, it was resurrection. And when Eva reached the heart of her piece, the moment where the melody dipped and swelled like breath returning after grief, Clara felt something inside her crack. She remembered a girl from years ago. Her name had been Elena. She had come from the outskirts of town, with calloused fingers and a smile that couldn't be taught. Clara had seen something dangerous in her then. Too much feeling, not enough form. She had let the board deny Elena's scholarship, insisting she wasn't ready. But maybe she had been. Maybe Eva wasn't the first story she had buried. Maybe she had been building walls not to protect excellence, but to protect herself from the kind of music that unraveled everything she believed in. Eva reached the final notes. They were soft, so soft the crowd leaned forward unconsciously, as though afraid to miss the last whisper of a truth finally spoken. She lifted her hands and let the silence speak. The hall erupted. It wasn't applause, it was thunder. People rose to their feet, some openly crying. Cameras flashed, hands clapped until they ached. But Eva didn't move right away. She stayed seated, her eyes closed, the echo of the final note still humming in her chest. Then she stood and bowed, and the world changed shape again. Afterward, as guests filtered into the marble foyer, Langford stood with Marianne, accepting congratulations with quiet grace. Eva moved through them slowly, still half lost in the music she had left behind on stage. She felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned. Clara stood there. For a moment, neither spoke. Clara's eyes were tired, not with age, but with the weight of everything left unsaid. "I was wrong," Clara said softly. Her voice held no ceremony now, just truth, raw, imperfect truth. "I saw your light and thought it would break the order I spent my life building, but maybe it's what was missing all along." Eva didn't answer right away. She simply searched Clara's face, the same face that once laughed at her, and saw something she hadn't expected. Regret. "I didn't come back for revenge," Eva said gently. "I came back because there's more to say." Clara nodded, "And the school is better for it." A pause. "Then, if you ever want to teach here, one day, the door will be open." Eva's eyes softened. "Maybe," she said. "But first, I want to keep playing while there are still people listening." They stood there for a long moment, the hallway alive with voices behind them, the echoes of applause still bouncing faintly off the marble floors. And then Clara stepped back. Eva returned to her room that night, beneath a sky dusted in stars. She sat at the window, a cup of tea warming her palms, and let the silence wrap around her like a familiar cord. Outside, the snow continued to fall. But inside her, the music never stopped. The sky above her hometown was lower than she remembered, stretched in muted grays over leafless trees and crooked fences. It had snowed here too, but the kind that turned quickly to slush, pooling on sidewalks and hugging the edges of cracked curbs. Eva stepped out of the cab in her coat and boots, carrying nothing but a worn music case and a heart full of things she hadn't yet named. She stood outside the old church for a moment, staring up at the peeling paint and faded stained glass windows. Time had curled its fingers around this place, but it hadn't let go. It still stood, still watched, still listened. Inside, the sanctuary was empty except for a row of flickering candles and the faint smell of wax and old pine. She walked slowly down the aisle toward the piano tucked beneath the front window, a battered upright with chipped keys and initials scratched into the wood from children long grown. This was where her mother had played, where she had first placed Eva on her lap and let her fingers find their way home. Eva sat down gently, brushing dust from the keys with her sleeve. She opened the case and took out a folder. newly filled with the handwritten arrangements of the lullabies, every one she had pieced together from memory and the recordings Marianne Rowan had given her. She set them aside. She wouldn't need them tonight. Her fingers hovered above the keys like they had 1,000 times before. But this time she wasn't playing to prove herself. She wasn't playing for scouts or judges or headlines. She was playing for one person, someone no longer in the pews, but in every breath of this room. She began. The melody that rose was simpler than any she had performed. No grandeur, no fire, just warmth, just love, a child's song wrapped in a woman's hands. Notes from a life built on sacrifice and silent courage. As she played, memories stirred. Her mother's laugh in the kitchen, the sound of spoons clinking against chipped plates, the hush of bedtime prayers whispered through cracked doors. The night she first found her mother asleep at the piano, fingers still resting on the keys, the final lullaby unfinished. Tears slipped down Eva's cheek, but she didn't stop. She played until the music felt like air, until the silence at the end was not an absence but a presence. A holy stillness. She let her hands fall to her lap, and for a long time she just sat there, her eyes closed. Behind her, the creak of a door opening. She turned. A small girl stood at the back of the sanctuary holding her father's hand. She couldn't have been more than 6, with braids and a ribbon in her coat. Her eyes were wide, unblinking. "Daddy," she whispered. "She sounds like dreams." Eva smiled. She stood and walked toward the girl, bending to meet her gaze. "Do you like the piano?" she asked softly. The little girl nodded. "I want to learn, but Daddy says we don't have one." Eva knelt beside her. "You don't need one yet. Just listen. Listen to the world, the wind, the trees, your own heart. Music's already inside you." The girl stared up at her like she was a storybook come to life. Eva reached into her case and pulled out a single sheet of music, one of the lullabies, and handed it to her. "When you're ready," she said, "play this." The girl clutched it like treasure, and something deep inside Eva settled. The next day, Eva visited the community center her mother used to clean on weekends. It was still open, though worn and underfunded. The piano there hadn't been tuned in years. The staff recognized her, some with tears, others with quiet awe. They asked if she would play. She didn't hesitate. She played for every child who didn't have a stage, for every parent who worked 3 jobs and still found time to hum a lullaby, for every basement, every broken bench, every voice that had been told it wasn't enough. She played until the walls felt warm again. Weeks later, back in the city, an announcement spread across social media. Eva Monroe launches the Lullaby Project, a foundation to bring music to forgotten corners. It began with donated pianos restored by hand. Then came scholarships. Then satellite schools in places like hers, where talent wasn't rare, just unheard. And always, wherever she went, she brought her mother's music with her. One afternoon, during a break from touring, Eva returned to the academy, not as a student, but as a guest artist. She walked the halls with quiet reverence. Some things had changed, others hadn't. Clara's name still sat on the plaque outside the headmistress's office, though now it was paired with another beneath it. Associate Director Marianne Rowan. In the main rehearsal room, Langford waited. Eva sat at the grand piano and looked up at her mentor. Langford nodded once. "Ready?" Eva smiled. "I've never stopped." The music began. And though the audience would change, and the years would pass and the headlines would fade, the notes she played that day would echo through generations, through hands yet to find the keys, through children still humming lullabies they didn't know they knew. Because Eva Monroe had done what few ever could. She turned silence into a song the world would never forget. And when the lights finally dimmed, it wasn't an ending. It was the final note of a beginning. Sometimes the world will try to measure your worth by where you come from, what you wear, or how quietly you stand in a room full of polished noise. But true greatness isn't shaped by permission. It's forged in silence, tested in storms, and revealed in the moments when you choose to play anyway. Eva Monroe wasn't born with privilege or applause. She was born with a melody, a quiet one, and the courage to keep playing it when no one else was listening. She was mocked, dismissed, and told she didn't belong. But when the lights went out and the rules no longer mattered, her truth rang louder than any title. This story reminds us that our beginnings do not define our endings. That the pain we carry can become the music we give the world. That the people who try to silence you often fear the power of your voice. So play your song, even if your fingers tremble, even if they laugh, even if the stage is small and the keys are broken, because sometimes the most beautiful music rises from the quietest corner, and when the world finally listens, they'll never forget what they almost missed.